What is up, health enthusiasts? It's Coach Lamby here for Working Weights LLC, your guide to strength, health, and all things nutrition. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Dwayne Ulrich, aka Papi Duoro.
Hey there, guys. How you doing?
And today we are going to be discussing the U.S. Dietary Guidelines.
I'm super excited about that. The USDA is a mystery, an enigma. We just accept it. So we don't even know those people are.
We just accept it.
We just accept it.
That's part of the controversy around the dietary guidelines. So I decided that this was a good topic because it a lot of the social media that I follow, and I guess what's streamed to me by the algorithm. I've seen a fervent uptick in people talking about the U.S. Dietary Guidelines, and most of it is negative. I don't know that there are very many people on social media that are very pro dietary guidelines, and so I've just seen a lot of it. And then I've had a few people in passing mentioned them, and kind of a distrust towards the government, and especially after what we went through for the last several years.
Yeah, whose name shall not be named.
He whose name shall not be named.
Yeah.
I just thought it would be a good topic to talk about, because once upon a time, I was in that same camp where the guidelines are, stupid, and they're leading everyone to become fat and sick, and it's really the blame of everything.
Yeah.
And then one single event caused me to change my mind. You think you can guess what that event was?
No.
I read them.
Oh my gosh. I didn't know where you were going with that. I'm going, I don't know.
I read them, and then I was like, oh, that's not what I heard at all. So yeah. So I figured it'd be good to run down these things and give everybody a taste of it. Of course, it's the links will be in the show notes, so everyone will have access to them. It's really not that hard to find anyway, but now you have no excuse as to why you can't read them or find them and see what they actually say for yourself.
Super cool. And I'm excited that people talk about it online, even if they're talking about it, as long as they make a decision to go, okay, well, what are the facts? And I think that if anything that our podcast has done is that when we start talking about things that we've heard or things that people say, is that we go to the data, right? So it's great to have lots and lots of conversation and even doubts, but at some point, go read the facts and read about it and do your research and then make a decision. Don't just go because Joe Bob, says, oh, we should all be, eating grass.
Eat the bugs.
Eat the bugs. I mean, just do the research, man. Just read the reports.
Yeah. And that's a big reason why I do the things that I do for the podcast, and the reason we go so in depth. I think that's probably the biggest issue that I see in the online health wellness space is there seems to be a lack of actual knowledge and verification and research, and just too much repeating what you heard somebody else on the internet say.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And it was, and I think everybody kind of has to start that way. You don't really know that much, and it's part of the way that we are taught to learn information is you listen to someone tell you, and then that person is supposed to know what they're talking about and to have verified those things. And so you are getting the correct information. And so, you can't really blame anybody for that. But my hopes are to, show people through this podcast and through going into everything, like, look, you can find this stuff. big portion of it is just learning how to find stuff, because it's
Right.
not, the
Right.
true stuff of it really isn't hidden, but it is harder to find because of the way the
Right.
internet is set up. So
Right. Right. Right.
yeah, so we're gonna start with the 1977 dietary goals for the
Dude,
United States.
good year, bro. 1977.
So this is where a lot of um, the debate online generally tends to happen, is that when these guidelines came out in 1977, changed everybody over to a low-fat diet, and that's when we really saw this uptick in a lot of the diseases that we experience in the modern world today, and obesity and everything else. And so um, we're going to read through this thing, and I'll try to go through it as fast as I can. It is quite a long piece of literature, and it's not even the whole thing. So we'll go through this as fast as we can and maybe show within here addressing a lot of the claims that are made online about these guidelines. And then we'll take a look at the updated guidelines from today and see what the differences are from 1977 to today, and give people an idea of what the government is recommending, what the USDA is recommending, and whether or not what you're hearing online from your experts are actually true.
Right. Good deal.
All right, so this is, as everybody can see, a photocopied version of all of this stuff, but that's what's available. So the first thing I want to go to here is right at the beginning of this piece of literature. There's a paragraph in here that I think really does a good job of summing up what we're getting online. And it says, the record clearly reflects extreme diversity of scientific opinion on these questions. Many such conflicting opinions are included in the committee's recent publication, Dietary Goals for the United States, Supplemental Views. Since it is possible that this diversity might be overlooked simply because few people will be able to take the time to read through the voluminous pages, 869 of them,
That'll be for next
titled,
week's podcast, by the
yeah,
way.
this
Just
next week's, titled Supplemental Views, I have selected a few opinions representative of both viewpoints on the issues in controversy. So some of the things that we're hearing online about the dietary guidelines is that there was a lot of ignoring of evidence or viewpoints and a lot of suppression of evidence and viewpoints in order to steer the American public towards a specific way of eating. And, this paragraph right at the front of this thing, I think sums it up very clearly, is that they were very aware at the time that there were multiple viewpoints on what these recommendations were and how they were going to affect the population.
mm-hmm.
And within the publication of this itself, they clearly state, hey, we're very aware of this. We've actually included many of the written opinions that we received from this in an entire supplemental table, an entire supplemental thing, right? So there really is no suppression of dissenting viewpoints. They included them, and they also go on as we go through this thing to show you, like, hey, these are some of the viewpoints on this. This is one side, this is the other. This is why we've decided to take this course of action. Okay, so the idea that there was suppression of anything or just flat out ignoring anything is wrong. All right, from the very top here. And so in the green, they go on to talk about dietary cholesterol and some other stuff. Down at the bottom paragraph there, because of these divergent viewpoints, it's clear that science has not progressed to the point where we can recommend to the general public that cholesterol intake be limited to a specified amount. The variances between different individuals are simply too great. A similar divergence of scientific opinion on the question of whether dietary change can help the heart illustrate that science cannot yet verify with any certainty that coronary heart disease will be prevented or delayed by the diet recommended in this report. So this is, I think, just a basic acknowledgement that, like they were saying at the time, hey, listen, nothing is conclusive. We're making these recommendations because, we think that all this stuff points in this direction. However, we can't guarantee that the outcome is gonna happen because of these recommendations, right? So there's an upfront acknowledgement of this. Okay.
Right. Everybody has a different DNA, body makeup, character, heritage, etc. Yeah.
And the science at the time on diet and its relation to disease just wasn't very clear. This was a point where they were still learning about a lot of stuff. But as we go through this, they'll talk about how everything is kind of pointing in a general direction. And so here's so everything I just passed is a lot of those differing viewpoints that author said that they were going to include in the beginning of this, right? So he selected a few viewpoints on certain areas of interest, and he included those up front, and those are the ones that he thought represented those opinions the best. So right in the front of this thing, they include different viewpoints on different topics. You have the preface here, and then getting down in here. So they're talking about risk factors at the beginning of the publication here. And so this is the first time this idea of risk factors has been introduced to the public. It's kind of been floating around in the scientific community for a little while, but this is the first time that they're introducing it to the public. And they say, the objective of this report, improved health through informed dietary selection by every American, is best served if the reader fully understands the idea of risk factors and what this phrase means in terms of diet and health. In general, risk factors refer to specific characteristics, age, lifestyle, diet, income, habits, such as smoking or excessive use of alcohol, or even where people live or work, that are associated with a higher than average incidence of a specific health problem. Risk factors, therefore, are warning flags. They suggest that if a characteristic describes a person, the chances are greater that he or she may now or in the future have the same health problem of the other people who have the same characteristics, be it a habit, an age, or a dietary pattern. However, the existence of risk factors among a group of people cannot tell us about the specific fate of any one person within that group. So talking about risk factors and going back to our Red Meat podcast where I was talking about forest fires. So risk factors, involved with forest fires, we think about things like weather conditions, terrain, even the amount or type of vegetation. So if we think about somewhere like the middle of the United States, Oklahoma, Nebraska, kind of the plains area, and we have a period of drought for 4 or 5 months, middle of the summer, temperatures are very high. It's also very windy. These are all risk factors which increase the likelihood of fires happening in that area, right? It isn't the lightning strike or the cigarette butt or the ignition source. It also isn't the grass. It's not the fuel source burning, but these are factors that causally have influence on whether or not fires happen and to the degree and progression of which they exist, right? And we can even take things into terrain like uphill. You have a forest fire under hot, dry conditions with wind blowing uphill. Oh, buddy.
Yeah.
Right? So all of those things, although they are not the ignition source or the fuel source, they are causally a part of that whole thing, right? They're
Yeah.
causally involved in fire. And so
Yeah.
that's what they're saying about these risk factors, right? These things are not, we can't say for sure that these things like your age, your lifestyle, your diet are actually the thing that is causing cancer and heart disease and stuff. But we do find that they are factors, right, that either raise or lower the risk of those things happening.
Right. Right. The probability. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And so here in this table, we can see where they have some of these risk factors, and then those translate to a physiological result, and then that translate to the end result. And the end result is a higher risk of heart disease. And so they also introduce calories to the public. So proteins, carbohydrates, and fats and alcohol all contain certain amounts of calories per gram for each one of those things. And they also say the appropriateness of a food for any one person also depends on personal factors such as taste preference, financial means, religious persuasions, family traditions, and other personal values. So while they're saying, hey, listen, these are the recommendations that we're going to make, you have factors in your life which are going to have a part in how you choose your diet as well. And those
Right.
are to be taken into account and to be welcomed.
Right.
And they talk about the RDA. So they actually started the concept of setting dietary guidelines has been well established since 1943. So these came out in 1977. So a full 34 years, right? They've been making dietary recommendations. And the RDAs are the levels of intake of essential nutrients considered in the judgment of Food and Nutrition Board on the basis of available scientific knowledge to be adequate to meet the known nutritional needs and practices of practically all healthy persons. And then they have a little outline of what the recommendations are, and we're going to go through all of this. And a nice little paragraph here at the bottom. So finally, because changing one's dietary pattern is normally a slow process of adjustment, the dietary goals should be initially viewed as indicating a direction of general magnitude for the change recommended. Once the dietary goals are achieved, one must approach food consumption as an average to be reached over a period of few days, and therefore not expect to consume each day the exact recommended proportion of calories from fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, or the exact amount of salt and cholesterol. So we can see that they're not rigid, strict guidelines, right?
Right.
And here they go. So this is the second edition. They had a first edition, and they're kind of explaining the differences between the second edition and the first edition. And the first edition was drafted in response to an ominous fact pattern, which associates certain dietary patterns and factors with 6 of the 10 leading causes of death. And they list some of these things. Deaths from colon and breast cancer are uncommon in countries with diets low in animal and dairy fats. Groups whose diets are low in fat and high in dietary fiber have much lower rates of cancers of the colon, rectum, breast, and uterus than comparable groups of Americans who consume more fat and less dietary fiber. Japanese who migrate to the United States and change to a Western diet from their traditional Japanese diet, which contains little animal fat and almost no dairy products, dramatically increase their increase of breast and colon cancer. Compared with persons of normal weight, obese people have a higher risk of developing cancer, especially cancers of the uterus, breast, and gallbladder. And then we have a witness as they were having, so this kind of was going through some hearings, right? And so they have their first witness, which is Dr. Ted Cooper. And he says, while scientists do not yet agree on the specific causal relationships, evidence is mounting, and there appears to be general agreement that the kinds and amounts of food and beverages we consume and the style of living common in our generally affluent sedentary society may be the major factors associated with the cause of cancer, cardiovascular disease, and other chronic illnesses. He agreed that malnutrition in the United States is associated with 6 of the 10 leading causes of death, including heart disease, some cancers, stroke and hypertension, arteriosclerosis, diabetes, and cirrhosis of the liver. So
Wow.
this is yeah, so here we kind of hear for the first time the state of the country, right? Living common in our generally affluent sedentary society, which is kind of funny because when we, you know, talk about today versus then, which would be the late 70s or early 80s, we would just say that we are more affluent and sedentary than they were back then. Oh, those people
Oh
got
yeah.
so much more activity back
Oh
then.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So another thing that's kind of said about this is before 1977, and everyone was kind of generally healthy, getting lots of activity. Obesity rates really weren't a problem. There just wasn't this issue with heart attacks and strokes and stuff. And so we're kind of getting a taste here that, well, they didn't really feel that was the case, right? He's kind of
Yeah.
saying here, we're
Yeah.
we're kind of sedentary.
Yeah. Yeah.
He goes on to say, again, I want to emphasize we are not saying that there is a direct relationship between diet and cancer. We do have strong clues that dietary factors play a preponderant role in the development of these tumors. Breast cancer, the biggest killer of all cancers in women, has a geographic distribution similar to that of colon cancer and is also associated worldwide with the consumption of a high-fat diet. Again, the disease is relatively rare in Japan, but increases among Japanese migrants to the United States. Like colon cancer, it is relatively uncommon among Puerto Ricans who have a relatively low intake of cholesterol and fat in their diet. So up front, there's recognition that there's varying viewpoints on this stuff,
Yep.
right? And so here they're laying out the reasons why they've chosen to go the direction that they've chosen. And during these hearings, so in red here, there was two industries, the meat and egg producers, who requested additional hearings to express their views. They were held on March 24th and July 26th, respectively. In addition, the National Livestock and Meat Board sent the select committee the names of 24 experts whose professional backgrounds and experiences in recent years suggest intimate knowledge of the fact, fallacies, and controversies which surround the concepts or hypotheses of diet as a precursor to atherosclerosis and other of the degenerative diseases in America and elsewhere. Their responses and others solicited by the select committee were immediately sought, and those received are printed in their entirety in Dietary Goals for the United States, the supplemental view. So in that 869 pages, these viewpoints from the doctors coming from the Meat and Egg and Livestock Council are included in their entirety. They didn't cut anything out. Okay. So this is further evidence that there was not suppression of evidence or viewpoints. All right. And so in the green portion here, they go on. So Senator Kennedy, chairman of the subcommittee on health and scientific research, so he got together a group involving over 200 scientists from 23 countries. So these guidelines are not just coming from the United States, right? This is input from multiple countries. On the relationship between diet and health, the survey reported in the journal found that 99.9% believe that there is a connection between diet and the development of heart diseases, with 91.9% believing that our knowledge in the area is sufficient to recommend a moderate change in diet. Specifically, the scientists recommend, in order of priority, fewer calories, less fat, less saturated fat, less cholesterol, more polyunsaturated fat, less sugar, less salt, more fiber, more starchy foods. And then they go on to acknowledge it has been correctly pointed out that this kind of survey has certain inherent limitations. So all in all, the committees and the people involved in putting together these dietary guidelines, as they're typing this out, seem to be quite honest about everything, right? There doesn't seem to be a suppression. They acknowledge that there are limitations to certain things that they're getting. They acknowledge that there are differing viewpoints. They've included everything.
Yeah, pretty much spells that out too, by the way. It just spells it out right there on a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the very things that they're talking about.
So we have another person here, Dr. Antonio Gatto,
I
and
just read
he is
that.
quoted, "I wish to reiterate one extremely important point that is explicitly and implicitly contained in these goals. That point is that medical practice is often must be based on the best available existing evidence, even though it falls short of a final scientific proof. Certainly, all of the scientific evidence concerning diet and its relationship to the major killer diseases is not in. But even when much more evidence accumulates from surveys, epidemiological studies, and basic research, there will continue to be honest professional disagreement concerning the basic dietary path to good health. However, because there already is much evidence which points in a general direction, and because health problems in our country are now enormously pressing, in my opinion, it is critical to take some action now." So again, acknowledgement. They don't have all the science. They weren't saying that they had all the science. They weren't
Yeah.
saying they conclusively proved anything, right? But they were saying, one, they felt at the time that the state of public health was at such a level that they needed to make recommendations, and that they also had sufficient evidence that pointed them in a certain direction to make recommendations.
You know what that's called? That's called evidence-based medicine.
Evidence-based medicine.
It
Yep.
is. It's evidence-based medicine.
Yep. And then here in yellow, so I'm gonna link put this in the links in the show notes for everybody. So you'll have this PDF with the highlighted areas, and I really recommend everybody go and read this giant quotation here in yellow. I don't want to read it now because I want to get through all of this stuff.
Yeah,
But
page 34 and 35 of that
yeah,
document. Yeah. Oh
yep.
yeah. That's
So
good
they
stuff.
even acknowledge here in green that there's some people who came to the meetings said that there would be physical harm or mental harm due to people based on the recommendations, and a lot of that had to do with the change in carbohydrates and fat. And so they go on to rebut that and say, hey, listen, we understand and acknowledge those viewpoints. We also have this other viewpoint, and we feel that their evidence that they've presented more strongly represents the truth. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
In red here, we have many experts now believe that we have entered a new era in nutrition when the lack of essential nutrients is no longer is the major nutritional problem facing most American people. Evidence suggests that the major problems of heart disease, hypertension, cancer, diabetes, and other chronic diseases are significantly related to diet. Although improved nutrition alone will not prevent these diseases, more attention is being focused on the underlying dietary habits, which may be antecedent or contributing causes to these conditions. We view this as a positive sign of the progress that has been made thus far and that undoubtedly will continue. We believe it is essential to convey to the public the current state of knowledge about the potential beliefs of modifying dietary habits without overstating the benefits that could possibly result from the adoption of alternative dietary practices, such as reducing excessive caloric intake and eating less fat, less sugar, and less salt. So these dietary guidelines, this is a change from what the government was making recommendations on diet before. So prior to these 1977 guidelines, and really kind of prior, during, and post World War II, and even World War I, I think the main concern in America was diseases of single nutrient deficiency. So you had
Yeah.
things like scurvy
Ricketts.
and
Yep. Yep.
rickets,
Yeah.
anemia, goiter,
Yeah.
beriberi, and that was a lot of the dietary focus before this stuff. And then once actually K rations were developed, we figured out very clearly how to fortify foods, how to package them, and make them what's the word?
More,
Sustainable.
yeah. Yeah. I was going
They
to say
could last a long time.
dietary complete.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of these single nutrient deficiency diseases were eliminated through the fortification of foods, and a lot of that came from the K ration, which was developed by Ansel Keys, a name that you will not find in the 1977 U.S. Dietary Guidelines, which is funny because a lot of the disease and obesity and everything that people are saying comes from this. They're saying it all started with Ansel Keys in the 7-country study, and you won't find Ansel Keys' name anywhere in here, nor will you find mention of the 7-country study. So there's that.
Wow.
All right, so they go on here to address some of the additions and changes from the first to the second edition. And so they have a new goal added here, which is to avoid overweight, consume only as much energy as is expended. And if you are overweight, decrease energy intake and increase energy expenditure. They go on to talk about obesity, right? The alarming prevalence of obesity in the United States. So again, this notion that their obesity just wasn't a problem before these guidelines came out doesn't seem to be supported in these guidelines, because they're saying there is an alarming prevalence of obesity, and that is why we are making recommendations, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
There is an alarming prevalence of obesity. There is an alarming prevalence of the development of cancers. There's an alarming prevalence of the development of heart diseases. Thus, we are making these recommendations.
Right.
So if these issues existed before the guidelines came out, the guidelines could not have caused them. Just saying. All right. So they talk about obesity. They talk about how exercise can play an important role in here. They also go on to address that children, specifically preschool age children, pregnant and lactating women, they all require special attention to ensure they receive enough calories and vitamins and minerals and all that stuff. They address alcohol consumption, and they talk about how alcohol has calories in it, and that makes up a certain decent percentage of people's diet at the time. Their goal number 2, and this is one of the debated things here, increase the consumption of complex carbohydrates and naturally occurring sugars from about 28% of energy intake to about 48%, right? So we're saying, they're saying increase your carbohydrate intake 20%. And they want you to do that by increasing consumption of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. In addition, naturally occurring sugars are obtained from fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, as well as from milk products. Okay, so increased carbohydrate intake. How do we want that to happen? Fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. Reduce the consumption of refined and processed sugars by 45%. For the listener, for the viewer, that's almost half. So the recommendation was to reduce refined and processed sugars by almost half.
Right.
Part of the other thing where people don't really like the dietary guidelines is they were saying that they wanted people to go to a low-fat diet, and how did they want them to do that was by increasing refined carbohydrates and added sugars. And we can see that that clearly was not the recommendation.
Exactly.
All right. They go on to talk about your plasma cholesterol, serum cholesterol, and kind of what they knew at the time. They didn't have the information that we have now. And so, again, they weren't saying, hey, listen, we have all of the information in and we know what this is and that is. But they were saying, this is the direction that all of the evidence is pointing us, right? And they talk about the different types of cholesterol, whether or not there was any evidence that lowering plasma cholesterol helped with any of this. They go on to address all of that. And then they have their recommendation for dietary cholesterol, which was 300 milligrams per day. And they say that this does not mean eliminating eggs.
Yeah, they
Okay.
really focus there to prove that that doesn't mean eliminating eggs. Yeah,
Yes, it also this is quote, nor does it imply that one should replace eggs with one of the highly processed egg substitutes or imitation egg products, right? So they
yeah,
are saying, please reduce your dietary cholesterol. And the main purpose for that was the effort to reduce saturated fat, right? So we're going to get to that, and that's one of the recommendations. But they were saying you don't have to stop eating eggs, nor do you have to replace eggs with these processed imitation things. So here, in summary, the Select Committee understands that there is still controversy surrounding the exact relationship of dietary cholesterol to heart disease, and that we must aggressively continue research in order to bring resolution to the current dispute. However, over the last 25 years, there has been a steady and mounting accumulation of basic research and epidemiological evidence which indicates that a high plasma cholesterol level is a major risk factor in heart disease, and that dietary cholesterol is one of a number of factors which affects plasma cholesterol. As one result, 10 national and international panels have recommended the restriction of dietary cholesterol for the general population.
Wow.
Americans die each year from heart and blood vessel disease, that 50% of all deaths are related to cardiovascular illness, cost the nation over $50 billion annually, and heart disease is America's #1 killer. So if there was not an issue with obesity, heart attack, stroke, diabetes, all of that stuff before the 1977 guidelines, how is it that America's #1 killer was heart disease?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, so it didn't just happen in the last 10, 15 to 20 years.
Right. Right.
It's been
And
there a
we're going
long
to see,
time.
they're going to show some graphs in here that show some stuff. So limit
Cool.
sodium to 5 grams per day. Decrease consumption of animal fat and choose meats, poultry, and fish, which will reduce saturated fat intake. So they didn't tell you to stop eating animal
Meat.
products either,
Right,
right?
right.
Yep. And yes, so here's this section on fat. Basic research is strongly corroborated by epidemiological studies of populations throughout the world who live quite well on a diet containing as little as 10% calories from fat. In summary, the goal of limiting fat consumption to 30% of total calories has not been a major point of contention and is derived from the recommendations of expert panels from around the world. So at the time, this recommendation of lowering fat really wasn't a big point of contention amongst the scientific community there, even despite having differing opinions. Along with consuming less animal fat by eating smaller portions of meat, it would also be possible to reduce fat consumption by eating the least fatty cuts of meats, by reducing the fat content of meat, or some combination of both. And then they go on to say that animal fat's not the only source of fat. So you have hydrogenated vegetable oils back in the day, and those came in the form of margarines, hard margarines, and that was a source of saturated fat as well.
Right, right.
So let's get down here. So here are the goals. There are 7 of them. 1, avoid overweight. Consume only as much energy as is expended. If you are overweight, decrease energy intake and increase energy expenditure. 2, increase consumption of complex carbohydrates and naturally occurring sugars from 28% to about 48%. 3, reduce the consumption of refined and processed sugars by about 45% to account for 10% of total energy intake. Reduce overall fat consumption from approximately 40% to 30% of energy intake. Reduce saturated fat consumption to account for about 10% of total energy intake, and balance that with polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats, which should account for about 10% of energy intake each. Reduce cholesterol consumption to about 300 milligrams per day. 7, limit the intake of sodium by reducing the intake of salt to about 5 grams per day. And then they go on to have some recommendations on how you can go about doing that. So increase your consumption of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. Decrease consumption of refined processed sugars. Decrease consumption of foods high in total fat, and partially replace saturated fat, whether obtained from animal or vegetable sources, with polyunsaturated fats. Decrease consumption of animal fats. Choose meats, poultry, and fish, which will reduce that, except for young children. Substitute low-fat and non-fat milk products for whole milk and low-fat dairy products for high-fat dairy products. Okay, so they also acknowledge young children, okay to give them that high-fat dairy stuff.
Yeah.
Decrease the consumption of butter, fat, eggs, and other high cholesterol sources, with the exception of premenopausal women, young children, and elderly.
Yeah.
Decrease consumption of salt and foods high in salt.
Yeah, there was a mentality back in there in the day where that giving kids and children milk was a leading factor to them becoming obese, and that's really not the case.
Yeah.
So
we're going to go over a big portion of the argument here, which is made online about the dietary guidelines. So the dietary guidelines recommended this low-fat diet, told everyone to increase their consumption of refined grains and sugars. That made everybody fat, sick, and caused a whole bunch of death. So to talk about the proportion of calories contained within the diet here, okay? So everyone's eating a diet that was whatever it was, 40% fat, 28% complex carbohydrates. We have 18% refined processed sugars and about 12% protein. Okay. And so that would represent 100% of a person's diet. So the recommendations are to increase complex carbohydrates by 20%. So if we add 20% to 100, that gives us 120. And then they wanted to reduce fat by 10%. So we minus 10%. That would be 12, leaves us with 108. And they asked us to reduce refined processed sugars from 18% down to 10. So that is minus 8%, which leaves us with 100%. So there was actually no recommendation in shift of calories, right? So the recommendation was keep calories the same. Now, the big contention here, low-fat diet, high carbohydrates. They asked people to reduce fat by 10%. Based on a 2,000 calorie diet, that equates to 200 calories. And they said, please do that by reducing that in saturated fat, basically. Reduce 200 calories from saturated fat. Now, something that is completely saturated fat is butter. 200 calories basically comes out to 2 tablespoons of butter. So the idea or the notion that we could have prevented the plague of disease on modern society with two tablespoons of butter, I think when it's framed that way, it sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, it does.
All right. So we have a graph here that they bring up and they show us. So this goes all the way back to, I think, 1909. The first date you see there is 1910. And so they have that level at 100, and we can see the increases and decreases of certain macronutrients in our diet. So protein, it kind of had a little dip there in the 30s and 40s, which was probably expected. That's the time of the Great Depression. But it stays relatively flat, right? So does total energy, food and calories, kind of remains flat this period between 1910 and 1970. But what we do notice is that there was a significant decrease in carbohydrate and a significant increase in fat. All right, now before the dietary guidelines, we were all consuming high-fat, low-carb diet. There was no obesity. Everybody was fine. There was no heart disease, no diabetes. On its face, the portion about having a higher fat, lower carbohydrate diet is true. The part about there not being any obesity or heart disease or anything like that is false. We can see there was a shift in carbohydrate from starch to sugar. So in the 1900s, early 1900s, main portion of carbohydrate that people were getting was starch, and that's going to be potatoes and vegetables and stuff like that. And then sugar made up a smaller percentage. And then as we increase in years up to 1976, we can see that sugar has a larger contribution to carbohydrate intake than does the starch. So people were consuming more sugar over this time. They go on to talk about heart disease here. Most population groups with a low incidence of coronary heart disease consume from 65 to 85% of their total energy in the form of carbohydrates derived from whole grain cereals and tubers. So here what they're saying is, like, look, we're looking out into the world and we're seeing who has the lowest rates of heart disease and what is the things that they're eating. And it wasn't a whole bunch of fat. They go on to talk about diabetes. Cause of diabetes was still unknown. It was very misunderstood at the time. But they even talk like, look, we still see benefits in people with diabetes by increasing their amount of complex carbohydrates, so fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. They go on more to talk about obesity here and the contribution from sugar. All right, so there was an acknowledgement in here that sugar was contributing to the problem. Their guide to increasing complex carbohydrate consumption, right? So how do we do this? Fruits and vegetables. And they talk about Department of Agriculture report found that nutrient availability from fruits and vegetables had declined with increased use of canned, frozen, and dried produce and shifts in consumption away from such vegetables such as white and sweet potatoes, dark green and yellow vegetables, dry beans and dry peas, and grain products. So there's an acknowledgement here that as we're beginning to increase our use of processing, we're finding that the nutrient density of many of these plant sources of calorie and nutrients that we're getting is decreasing.
Yeah.
And we can see that from 1925 to 1971, the amount of processed fruits and vegetables in the person's diet increased to the point where in 1971, it overtook fresh consumption.
Right.
And they go on to talk more here about processing and refining. Highly refined fruits and vegetables generally should not be viewed as nutritional equivalent or substitutes for the same food in its fresh form. Table 3 shows that potato chips and dehydrated potatoes should not be thought of as the nutritional equivalent of fresh baked potatoes. Here we talk about grain products. Of grain products, bread is the most widely consumed. However, bread consumption has been declining in the United States, in part because it has been viewed incorrectly as fattening. And
funny because it's funny because that's even still the day of the grain products.
Today.
Bread's most widely, yes. Yeah. And that was in 1975.
Yeah. And so they talk about a study here where a bunch of people, they had a bunch of men and they asked them to consume 12 slices of bread per day.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of bread. And so what they found is that in the process of consuming this bread, now we're talking about whole grain bread here. Okay.
Yeah.
We're not talking about
enriched white bread.
Enriched white flour.
Right.
They found that these people were full before they, they were full faster, so they ended up not consuming as much. And over the course of 8 weeks, they lost almost 13 pounds. Another study found that young men could obtain 90 to 95% of their protein needs from white enriched bread. And in some countries, bread may contribute as much as 80% of protein needs. So here they're saying, like, listen, we don't need to get rid of bread because it can make a major contribution to our protein sources. Also, if we consume this whole wheat version, people might lose weight. All right, there are no arguments. Oh, there are also arguments, though somewhat less conclusive, suggesting not only that increased bread consumption is warranted, but that more whole wheat bread should be eaten. However, whole wheat bread may provide more micronutrients and definitely provide more fiber than white bread. In bread, as with other foods undergoing processing, there is the danger that as the degree of processing increases, nutrients, both known and unknown, are removed or altered in ways not currently understood. So they go on to show a little graph here about how as the degree of processing of bread increases, we see this reduction in all of these specific nutrients. White bread represents a less efficient use of nutrients in wheat than whole wheat. If one uses whole grain wheat flour instead of white flour, for every 100 grams of wheat, we gain 30 grams of material containing 93 calories in bread, of which 73% is digestible energy, for a net gain of 63 calories. And 4.5 grams of protein, of which 73% is digestible, for a net gain of 3.4 grams of protein. Since flour milling byproducts go to animal feeds in the US, where they are converted to meat at an efficiency of about 10 to 25%, a loss in energy and protein value is sustained by not eating the whole wheat bread. So we can see that the recommendation for bread was to consume whole wheat bread. All right, table 5. So they go on to talk about rice, and so brown rice should be preferred, then parboiled, then common white enriched rice, then instant rice, okay? So the brown rice would be considered the whole grain. They're going to talk about breakfast cereals. Hot cooked breakfast cereals are generally less refined and processed and less expensive than ready-to-eat cereals. Of the hot cereals, which they define as wheat, rye, and oat, whole grain cereals are most nutritious. Less nutritious are cream of wheat and cornmeal, so think corn flakes. The authors point out that infant and quick hot cereals may have less nutrients than their longer cooking counterparts. So in regards to breakfast cereals, right, they're saying, hey, consume oatmeal and wheat and rye and barley, things that you have to cook for a very long time. In ready-to-eat cereals, sugar-coated cereals should be avoided. And Nutri-Score explains that granola also offers a high caloric intake for the amount of nutrients available. Flaked, shredded, and puffed cereals may be enriched, but Frames and Sabry note that many trace elements are not added, nor is fiber, and so the enriched refined cereal is never as good nutritionally as the wholesome unrefined cereal. Here we have a chart on sugars, all right? So the acknowledgement here is that for sure, total sugar was increasing. The amount of refined cane and beet sugar was increasing. And corn syrup, we see right here in about 1965, corn syrup just shoots straight up. All right, so they were very aware of sugar intake. The greatest impetus for the increased use of sugars apparently has come from the addition of refined sugars to processed foods. Figure 9 shows the dramatic increase in the use of refined sugars added outside the control of the consumer. So something is happening here where we're starting to get this understanding that they are putting some portion of responsibility on food industry here, right? Not just for the Americans to acknowledge, hey, there's a lack of understanding about what all these things are, what they have been, here are the recommendations going forward, but also we are going to need help from the food industry in shifting a lot of this stuff. All right, so they talk about processed foods in here. They talk about refined sugars. They're talking about all this stuff. This increased use of refined sugars is traceable in large part to the desire of food manufacturers to create unique food products with a competitive edge. Sugars, particularly foods that contain sticky forms of refined and processed sugars, taffy-like candy, sugar-coated cereals, granolas, raisins, dried fruits, have been implicated in tooth decay, which may be the most widespread disease related to nutrition. The consumption of sugars can lead to cavities in children and adults and gum disease and eventually loss of teeth.
I just want to throw something in real quick.
Yeah.
So in those days, sugar was, for the most part, sugar was a luxury. Like the late 50s, early 60s, and even up to 70s, it's like sugar was, for most people, was kind of a luxury, whether it be just a chocolate bar or how much you put sugar, how much sugar you put in your iced tea. And I think that they were pointing out here is that cereals with sugar on them, breads that were an increased sugar, is like that's what you were talking about. What's the wording? Outside of the normal. Gosh, what did it
outside
say?
of the consumer's control.
Yeah, because the consumer at first just, I mean, they weren't dumping all that sugar and stuff in there to begin with, because that uh don't ask me how old I am, but I remember days when, if you got a spoonful of sugar or two in a glass of tea, that, oh my gosh, yeah. But that wasn't the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And then as time goes by, then we start seeing like the influx of all the sugared cereals. I remember when cornflakes, that was it. And then you got frosted flakes, and then you got this, and then this, and next thing you know, you got Count Chocula and Captain Crunch,
Yeah.
and that's stuff that, yeah, that was outside the consumer's normal
Right.
dietary path. So
So
just
I
wanted to point
think,
that out.
yeah, no, that's good. And I think it's a good segue because I wanted to bring this up is that there seems to be a conflation between what the dietary recommendations were actually recommending and the
Right.
health washing of food products by the food industry. So a lot of people will
Yes.
say that the dietary guidelines allow a person to eat like pizza and Lucky Charms and Frosted Flakes and whatever, because those fit within, a whole grain, whatever they're labeled as a whole grain. And we clearly see from the guidelines here, they were saying that is not the things that we are recommending, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Although although they fit in that category, those are not the things we are recommending. We are recommending the whole food source of these things.
Right. Right.
So there seems to be a misunderstanding of what the guidelines say. Number one, going all the way back to the beginning of this thing, and I think which is a recurring theme in the podcast here, is people haven't read the darn thing,
Yes. Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
right? Because once we start
Absolutely.
reading it, we can see very clearly that they were recommending a pretty healthy diet.
Yes. Yeah.
Whether you like the amount of carbohydrate or fat that they were recommending one way or the other, altogether, what they were recommending were healthy foods, healthy options.
Yeah.
Right. So we talk about nutrient danger. So the concept of diet is one of displacement. So whatever you're eating now displaces something that you could be eating instead. And so if we're replacing fruits and vegetables and whole grains with sugar, although sugar is providing us a source of energy, it's really devoid of any other nutrients. They talk about the role of sugar in diabetes at the time, right? It was a blossoming field of science, and they were saying, "Hey, look, nothing's inconclusive, but we do have evidence in these rats that if we give them sugar, they develop diabetes. If we take it away, the diabetes goes away." In reviewing ways of cutting out the consumption of refined and processed sugars, the most obvious item for general reduction is soft drinks. Total elimination of soft drinks from the diet.
Wow. Wow.
Right? Currently, soft drinks
Mm.
compete with coffee for first place. So as we go along and reread this thing, this sounds like it was written yesterday,
Wow.
not 1977, right? These issues still plague us today. Finally, it is important to remember that refined and processed sugars have been added to a wide range of products, although labeling regulations do not currently require the content of the different sugars to be described. If some kind of sugar, i.e., corn syrup, fructose sugar, dextrose, honey, etc., is listed as one of the first 2 or 3 ingredients, then one can reasonably assume that there is a lot of sugar added to the product. As noted earlier, the use of fresh food enables greater protection against hidden, refined, and processed sugars. So at this time, they didn't have nutrition labels like we do, where you look on the back of the can and you can see how much protein, fat, sugar, added sugar, all that's in there. That wasn't in there. So what they have in this paragraph is information for the average American to be able to look at ingredients and determine how much sugar is in there. And then also the recommendation to, hey, if you're going to go ahead and just use fresh fruits and vegetables, you'll be avoiding this process altogether. And then here we have reduced overall fat consumption, and they go about talking about how fat consumption has increased, and that the increase from the beginning of the century to 1973 basically is the equivalent of 2.5 tablespoons of butter. And so again, that's what I'm talking. What their recommendation was a reduction of 2 tablespoons of butter. All right. Higher fat consumption trends have occurred in other nations as well. So it's not just happening in America. Governmental and professional groups in the United States and 8 other nations have recommended decreases in total fat consumption. So the idea that this was the United States, the USDA alone, doesn't stand up. And we can see here per capita consumption of nutrient fat increased over 5 years. Fat as a percentage of calories. They go on to talk about obesity and fat, cancer and fat. Everybody can read this. Reduce saturated fat. Okay, so that was the main way that they were recommending to reduce that 10% of fat, was reducing saturated fat. And then we have the graph here, and they're just showing the different types of fat. They also go in this section to discuss the different types of fat, saturated, mono, and polyunsaturated fat, and how all these other things give a good education on it. So this guidelines from 1977 is actually a pretty good education in all of this. They say the proportion of saturated fat in the diet has declined from about 40% of total fat to about 38% in 1975, but the total amount of saturated fat in the average American diet has increased. Currently, mono and polyunsaturated fat consumption has grown even more quickly. These increases are primarily due to the increased use of salad and cooking oils. They're going to talk about reducing calorie or cholesterol, whole bunch of other stuff. So you can see just how long this thing is. I've read the whole darn thing.
That's a lot of reading.
They go on to talk about food additives, like food coloring. We have BHA and BHT. We have nitrates and nitrites, monosodium glutamate, which is MSG. And then the recommendations for governmental action, all this stuff down here. They go on to talk about the impact of television food advertising. Since World War II, the largest expenditure for public information on diet in the United States has been made by the food industry. There's another portion in here that I want to see. It is likely that those most influenced by food advertising are low-income and elderly consumers who are least capable of comprehending written guidance on food selection and least able to make comparisons between foods based on nutrition labeling and price. So again, there was this big push to say, hey, this isn't really going to happen unless we get help from the food industry. While constantly presented with persuasive messages on the kinds of foods to buy, the consumer has had remarkably little information on the nutritional characteristics of the food itself. And so we can see from there how we would get our nutrition labels that are on everything now. There's this effort to educate the consumer about what it was they were eating. Let's go to our current dietary guidelines. So this is 2022 to 2025, and this is quite a long piece of literature as well. And so we're going to soar through this thing real quickly and just show a few things here. So they have, we now have recommendations on stages of development and stages of life. So from toddler, infant and toddler, children and adolescents, teenagers, adults, and elderly. This is talking about adherence. So another thing about these, the notion that the guidelines have made everybody, fat, sick, and diabetic. Well, you're gonna have to prove that people were following them. Okay, and so here in the newest ones, we have adherence over time. This goes back to 2005, and we can see that adherence is roughly right around this 60% mark towards the dietary guidelines. I wonder what the obesity rate is.
Man. Wow.
I'm sure there's nothing there.
Hmm.
All right. So we're still talking about obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, even in the updated ones, right?
Cancer.
Nothing's changed.
Yeah. And
We want
cancer.
to talk about all these different stages of life, how to develop your own healthy dietary guidelines. or your own dietary pattern. We have a new thing. Everybody complains about the food pyramid. Well, the food pyramid hasn't existed for quite some time now. We now have
Right.
My Plate.
Right.
Okay. And so half of your plate should be fruits and vegetables. A little more than a quarter is going to be grains. They want you to make half of your grains whole grains. Okay. And again, they're not saying this is the optimal diet, but they're saying you people eat too much processed grains. And so asking you to change all of that over to whole grains is going to be near impossible. So please try to make half of it whole grain. And then we have protein. Protein is a little less than 25% of the plate. And they say vary your protein routine. Don't eat the same stuff all the time. Limit foods and beverages that have added sugars, saturated fat, and sodium. So that hasn't changed. Move to low fat, fat free dairy, milk, or yogurt. That hasn't changed.
Okay, I want to throw something at you if you don't
Go ahead.
mind. So maybe if you want to include this. So I just looked up like the nutrition panel on a box of Captain Crunch, just to use that as an example. And so I'm looking at it, and I just know that before you and I ever met, when I look at and I was not a Captain Crunch fan. I'm not banging on Captain Crunch, but it's got the most sugar that I've ever tasted on a cereal.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I would always look at, especially buying cereal for the kids, would be I'd go through there and I'm looking at all this stuff. Okay. Yeah. I know it's got a little bit of extra sugar there and blah, 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 blah. But then I'd always get down to the end. And this is on percent daily value of what I always assumed was USDA recommended, numbers. And then I'd get down to all the vitamins. I'm like, oh, wow, it's loaded with iron and thiamine and riboflavin. It's got all these high percentages of what's in there. But I would gloss over the fact that in added sugars, is 33% of your daily value,
Mm-hmm.
like 17 grams. And I mean, I'm not saying that I'm an educated consumer now, but as a pre-educated consumer, I'm just looking for stuff that had vitamins for my kids
Uh-huh.
and for myself. And the sugars was like that wasn't a huge thing to me. And then I flipped over to the Food Data Central. This search results, it talks about historical records, Captain Crunch, Oops, and they're having a couple of cereals there that, flavored sweetened corn and oat cereal, blah, blah, blah. And then there's a deal right down here. It says information provided by food brand owners is label data. Brand owners are responsible for the descriptions, the nutrient data, and the ingredient information. So the USDA calculates values per 100 grams or 100 milliliters from values per serving. Values calculated from percent daily value use current daily values for an adult
Yeah.
taking in 2,000 calorie diet. So
Yeah.
all those
Yeah.
numbers are based on an adult.
On an adult. Yeah.
And then I was always suckering in because, oh, look at all the vitamins in there. And you gloss over the point that like some of these cereals have 30 to 40% of sugar added to your daily value.
Right. And
And then they
again, that's
and then people blame that on the USDA,
on the guidelines.
on the
Yes.
guidelines.
Because there's a conflation with health washing because it's
Yes.
fortified with all these vitamins, minerals, and nutrients.
Yes.
And then to say, well, this fits within the US dietary guidelines, it doesn't.
Yes.
It
It
doesn't.
doesn't. Yeah.
So we're going to scroll down here. So here's some things. All right. So what you can substitute. So instead of having frosted shredded wheat, have plain shredded wheat, right?
Yes. Yes.
Full fat yogurt with added sugars, have plain low fat yogurt with fruit.
Yes.
Regular canned black beans, low sodium. Instead of butter, use oil. Instead
Right.
of soda, drink sparkling water.
Yes. Yes. All agreed on all of that.
So nothing. And we can see all of the pictures of food that they have in here so far. We don't have any pictures of bowls of Captain Crunch.
Mm-hmm.
This is adherence by age group. So our young children, ages 2 to 4, tend to have a little bit higher adherence because parents generally want their kids to eat healthier. And then as we get older in this 60 and plus, people are generally a little bit more concerned about their health, so they tend to adhere to the guidelines a little bit better. Customize your food and enjoy it. They go and discuss what they mean by all of these things. What is a grain? What is a whole grain? What is a refined grain? They give you examples of all that stuff. Dairy and fortified milks, nuts, seeds, blah, blah, blah. And then we have dietary intakes compared to the recommendations, right? So this is ages 1 and older. So what do we see here? For total vegetables, everyone is consuming less vegetables than is being recommended. Everyone is consuming less fruit than is being recommended. About half the people are consuming not enough, and half the people are consuming more than enough total grains, but everyone is consuming not enough whole grains, and everyone is consuming too much
Mostly
refined grains.
Refined grains. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Look at that.
Almost everyone is not consuming enough dairy and total protein foods.
That's surprising.
Yeah,
that surprises me.
Right? For total protein, half the people aren't consuming enough. Half the people are consuming too much. Half the people are not consuming enough meat, poultry, and eggs. Half the people are consuming too much of that. Seafood, almost no one is consuming any seafood. Nuts, seeds, and soy products, that's about half and half as well. So we can see that, really no one is adhering to these darn guidelines. You can't blame them for anything.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We have fruits, we have grains, and look at this. Look at that.
It looks delicious. I know, right?
All right. So I'm trying
invite
to
me to that
down
house.
Here. Yeah. I'm trying to get down here because they have a good recommendation. So we can see a swap here, okay? So a burrito bowl. Typical burrito bowl, total calories 1120. They have the nutrient dense version over here, 715 calories. So they're showing you how you can have the same meal, make some substitutions, right? Reduce the calories, increase the nutrient density of it. And then they have
whoa. I don't mean to belabor this. Go back that screen and get one more time. So look at the ingredients in both of those. The stuff we talk about all the time. Yep. White rice versus brown rice. Black beans versus black beans reduced sodium. Cooked chicken with grilled chicken with a spice rub, same value. And you're dropping calories left and right. Guacamole versus sliced
no vegetables
avocado
versus added vegetables.
Yes, no sour cream.
No sour cream. I think you could throw a little bit of sour cream on there, or even some fat-free Greek yogurt instead of sour cream. That'd be good.
Eat the heck out of a jalapeno. Feel free.
Iced tea with sugar versus iced tea no sugar. So yeah, I mean, the recommendations aren't wild.
Yeah.
And here they have an example of a day of eating. So you have your breakfast at 375 calories. We have overnight oats and a coffee. Lunch is that burrito bowl that we just saw at the top for 710 calories and an iced tea.
Yeah.
And then we have dinner, which is oven roasted tilapia and vegetables with pasta, 510 calories.
So good.
Now that is not Kellogg's Frosted Mini Wheats, pizza rolls, and Burger King for dinner. That is not what they're recommending. Okay. We also have some snacks here, right? Air pop popcorn and some yogurt and some peaches, and for the day, 2,000 calories. So that's what a 2,000 calorie diet looks like. They talk about added sugars. Keep it to less than 10% of calories per day. So that recommendation hasn't changed since 1977. Hasn't changed at all.
It's amazing.
They talk about where we're consuming our added sugars, right? Sugar sweetened beverages making up the major portion of that, almost 25% of it. And then we have desserts and sweet snacks. We have soft drinks over here. Within the beverages, soft drinks make up the major portion of it. And then for the dessert snacks, it'd be cookies and brownies and ice cream, cakes and pies. Those kind of share the load. What do we have? Donuts, sweet rolls, and pastries coming in last. They talk about saturated fat. What is their recommendation? Less than 10%. So that recommendation hasn't changed either.
Same numbers.
Sandwiches. Weird. make up the major portion of saturated fat intake for the day. Within the sandwich group, other sandwiches, I'm not really sure what that means, but that makes up the major portion. And then they also say within dessert snacks, we get a major portion of saturated fat from desserts and sweet snacks, and that's coming from ice cream and frozen dairy, cookies and brownies. Talk about sodium. We've talked about sodium before. What's the recommendation?
Yep.
A nice thing about these updated guidelines here, as you were saying on the Captain Crunch, that's based on a 2,000 calorie diet here. So for a lot of these updated recommendations today, we have sodium recommendations for ages 1 through 3, ages 4 through 8, 9 through 13, and then 2,300 milligrams a day for all other age groups. So once you get 13 years old and above, or 14 years old and above, you're at 2,300 milligrams a day. So we have age-appropriate recommendations here. So top sources of sodium, sandwiches. Sandwiches seem to be an issue. They teach you how to read a nutrition label. They talk about alcoholic beverages, supporting healthy dietary patterns for all Americans. So we're going to get down here. So now this is a section on infant and toddlers, and they're going to have their specific recommendations on these specific stages and development of life. They also give us some indication as to how well this age group is adhering to the guidelines. And look, they even have how do you switch from added sugar and a bunch of junk in your food for your toddler? Here's some recommendations on how to do that. Here you have your amounts of everything they want you to consume. And we have, here's where we have the average intake versus the recommendation. Total vegetables, the average intake is low. Dark green vegetables, it's low. Red and orange, it seems to be fine. It's at the lower end. Beans, peas, and lentils, it's low. Starchy vegetables, it's within range. And then other, it's within range below. Grains, total grains is higher than the recommendation. And guess where that's going from? Refined grains.
Yeah.
And that is a recurring theme throughout all stages of life as we run through here. All right, so we're just going to scroll through this because a lot of this is just life stages. We're in the adult section now. Okay, and so here you have calorie level of pattern. So depending on how many calories you eat per day, what it is that they're recommending in cups per day. Whoops. What happened there?
Did you change tabs? There you go.
Yes, so women who are pregnant or lactating. And then we also have older adults at the end here.
And a big key here is this is not hidden information.
It's not hidden. This is easy to find. I'm going to put the link to it.
Dietaryguidelines.gov.
Yep. So our current intake, 60 and older, we saw that this was the highest adhering group compared to other age groups. What do we have? Total vegetables, both male and female, everybody's low. Total fruits per day, everybody's low. Total grains, oddly enough, female are lower than the recommendations, but the men are right there inside of it. They're at the bottom end. Total dairy, everyone's low, way low. And total protein foods, females are not eating enough. Men are right at the top end of there.
That's interesting.
Added sugars. So the percent exceeding limits of added sugars, sodium, and saturated fat. So we can see half of everybody within this age group is exceeding the recommended range of added sugars. About 80% of everybody in this age group is exceeding saturated fat, and males 94% exceeding their sodium intake. Females about 72%.
3,700 milligrams. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yep. So, we got a table here of nutritional daily goals, ages 2 and older, all these different macro and micronutrients, all these vitamins, minerals. They have recommendations, all that by age. So now you can look to this chart for your child, look on the box of the cereal and be able to determine whether or not all that stuff is appropriate for your child.
Right.
Here's an appendix on how to estimate your caloric intake. All right. Again, all this stuff in cups per day for your age groups. And then here at the bottom, we have definitions of what they're saying everything is. So whole grains versus refined grains. This is one people mix up here. All whole grain products are whole grains used as ingredients. For example, amaranth, barley, not pearled, brown rice, buckwheat, bulgur, millet, oats, popcorn, quinoa, dark rye, triticale, whole grain cornmeal, whole wheat bread, whole wheat chapati, whole grain cereals and crackers, and wild rice. The refined grains are white breads, refined grain cereals and crackers, corn grits, cream of rice, cream of wheat, barley, pearled, masa, pasta, and white rice. Refined grain choices should be enriched. So that's that, man. Dietary guidelines. They're not evil.
Nope.
They didn't.
They haven't changed a whole lot since 1977 when the that initial study came out. So the numbers are pretty close to the same, actually.
Yep, they haven't changed. And going through and reading the 1977 Dietary Guidelines, like I say, as we were reading through that, it sounds like it was written yesterday. So the notion that those things caused, you know, a lot of the problems that we have today is just, it's ludicrous on its face once you read through there and you actually see what it was they were recommending. And, you know, the idea that they were saying, hey, you need to reduce fat as low as possible. And by doing that, we want you to eat a whole bunch of sugar-laden cereals and cookies and crackers and chips and soda and stuff. That's a ridiculous notion as well. That's not what they were recommending. Updated guidelines, if you were to adhere to that thing, you would be eating a pretty healthy diet, pretty darn healthy diet. So
yep. Agreed. Just, man, the information is there, so just don't believe everything people tell you. Be an informed individual.
Yeah. It's fine to want to you know, have an expert that you trust and you enjoy the way that they deliver information to you, but you need to go and verify stuff. If people are making claims, you know, it's fine, learn it, but look it up, right? Most of the stuff that's being said on the internet just doesn't pass basic fact checking. You don't even have to go very far to find out whether or not it's true. So
right, absolutely, agreed.
All right, I think that about wraps it up for this one. I hope somebody got something out of this. I hope you start using the dietary guidelines. Dwayne, I hope it blew your mind.
Blew my mind. I've never looked at the new dietary guidelines, but I'm going to go there just for good information and really amazing recipe ideas. Those foods look great.
Yeah, that one day is not a bad day.
That looked awesome. Good stuff, brother. Good stuff.
All right. Well, we will see everybody next time. Lamby out.
That was awesome.